Hello and welcome to another edition of Shattered Lives, the Irish Daily Star and Irish Mirror's crime podcast. I'm Paul Healy. I'm the paper's crime correspondent, and I'm joined as ever by Michael O'Toole, our crime and defence editor. How's it going, Michael?
Hello, Paul.
Well, today is the second day of the trial of Jozef Puska, who's accused of the murder of Ashling Murphy. Ashling Murphy, she was killed in Tullamore, County Offaly in January of last year, on the 12th of January last year, at the Grand Canal there while she was out for a run. And Mr Puska denies the charge. He's accused of Miss Murphy's murder, and it was yesterday when he pleaded not guilty before the court. So today really was, while we got the opening of the trial yesterday, today really was the first day where we got into what will be the state's case against Mr Puska. And I just want to kind of, because we can be a bit freer with what we can say today, give people, I suppose, an insight into, because you were in the courtroom obviously today, what's it like in the courtroom? Can you give us an idea of where people are seated? It's court number 13, isn't it, in the CCJ?
Yes, Paul. So that's on the fourth floor of the CCJ. I think it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, courtrooms in the complex, and it's a very big complex. There's well over 20 courts. So essentially what we have, you walk in and Mr. Justice Tony Hunt, who is the trial judge, is facing everybody else. So he's at the front of the room or the back of the room, whichever way you want to look at it, facing the doors basically, and he's up on a raised platform. Now, he is sitting directly underneath the harp, which is the national symbol, and it's in all courts. In front of him, also facing out and also slightly lower down, but still on the raised platform, are court staff. So you have the registrar and you have the stenographer and maybe one or two other people. In front of them, also facing out, are the respective solicitors and legal teams, non-barristers. So that's the solicitor for the state and the solicitor for the defence, for Mr Puska. And as we're looking at it, they are facing towards us, and the defence is on the left-hand side as we're looking at it, and the prosecution is on the right. In front of them, and from there on in, we are all facing in the same direction towards the judge. So those people are facing towards us, where everybody else in the body of the court is facing towards them. And the first people there are the two senior counsel. So the senior counsel, or the lead prosecutor for the state, is Anne-Marie Lawlor, senior counsel. To her left is Michael Bowman, who is the lead defender. So he is the defender for Mr Puska. Now, their senior counsel, you can always tell a senior counsel by two things. Firstly, they're at the front row of all the seats. And secondly, the gowns they wear, I don't know if you know this, Paul, the gowns they have a small flap on the back. Behind them are junior counsel or barristers at law, and they have the gowns almost akin to, teachers' gowns way back in the 70s and stuff. But they don't have the flap, so that denotes them as junior counsel or barristers. Then behind them is there's another row, and then there's the row for the media. Now we're very thankful that row is a row of desks all put together, so we can put our laptops on it. Basically, we're taking notes. Then behind that there are family members. Then behind that there are civilians. Over to the right is the jury. Now the jury always faces the accused, so they're side on to the accused. So they're at one side of the room. Mr Puska is facing them, and that's so that in any case the jury has to have the best look at the accused. So they're looking at each other. They're sort of side on. We're all looking towards the judge, and behind the jury box, I don't know if you know this, Paul, that's where the guards always sit. So that's where all the investigators and all the guards involved in this. And there was quite a lot of civilians there today. So there is obviously a lot of interest in this case.
There's interest in it. So I believe before Miss Lawlor got up and outlined the case, Justice Hunt explained to the jury, I suppose, a little bit more about what their role is in this case. And I believe he said they're there to assess what they believe and what they don't believe, and to apply their common sense. Is that right?
Yeah. So basically, he basically said they're in charge of the case. He is there to make sure that matters run shape, but they will be the people who find the facts. And even at the end of the case today, if you remember last night, we reported how he said basically ignore social media, ignore the media. You are the deciders of the fact, and you've got the best seats in the room, basically. And that was very much a continuation of this. He really impressing on them. This is your job. There are no extraneous things. It's up to you guys to decide on the evidence that you will hear. Nobody else really matters.
Yeah, and I see the quote from the judge there from your live blog. You know, it's very, very important that you look at Mr. Puska as a person who is cloaked in the presumption of innocence. And we start from that position, and that position is maintained during the case. So Mr. Puska has the presumption of innocence throughout this next 5 weeks, unless or until the jury decides otherwise. That's basically how the process works.
Yes, and so the starting point is that of innocence, and that's the presumption, and the prosecution has to try and rebut that. Anne-Marie Lawlor, the senior counsel, basically said that's what we have to do. We have to try and rebut that presumption of innocence that Mr. Puska is entitled to. So yeah, then it was over to Anne-Marie Lawlor. So yesterday, I'm called yesterday day one. Some people might call today day one. Today was the opening of the state's case. And that's when Anne-Marie Lawlor, as I say, who is the chief prosecuting counsel, stood up and essentially told the jury, this is what we're going to tell you. This is the evidence that you will see. And there was quite a lot in her opening speech. So we'll go through it now.
Yeah, and I think today is an interesting day in the case. In any case, with the opening of the case by the prosecution, you get a synopsis of pretty much everything that the state will allege against Mr. Puska. So we have a lot of facts that we can talk about today now about this case. So I understand she kind of, Miss Lawlor just said that she was giving a roadmap of the case in her opening. So she said there's going to be strands of evidence which, taken together, basically, they say will prove Mr. Puska's guilt. And then it's up to the jury to decide whether they agree with the prosecution in relation to that. So straight into it, I just want to say before we get into this evidence that this is quite harrowing information. Some of it is quite graphic. It might not be comfortable listening for everyone. So if you don't want to listen to anything particularly graphic, we would like you to listen to us, obviously. But if you find there's anything that is particularly offensive to you or upsetting to you, we just want to give you that warning before we get into the evidence now. So, I mean, she did really get straight into it, I understand, Mick, in terms of how Miss Murphy died.
Yes, Miss Lawlor said that Miss Murphy, first of all, she said she was a 23-year-old teacher from just outside Tullamore, and she was working as a primary school teacher in Durrow, which is nearby, but over the border in County Laois. And she said that on the 12th of January, she left school and she went to Tullamore, to the canal, to do some exercises, basically to go exercising. And the state's case says that she was murdered. She suffered a fatal assault at approximately 3:30 on the 12th of January. Now, she did say in her opening statement that she suffered 11 stab wounds. Now, later she would say that there were 12 force wounds, 11 of which were stab wounds to the right side of her neck. And that she did say that that's an indication that whoever did this, it was clear that the person intended to kill or cause serious harm. Now, that's an important definition because that is the benchmark for murder. You have to either want to kill somebody or kill somebody, so there has to be that intent. So she was getting that point across, that 11 stab wounds, and she did say there were 12 wounds. She also said later on that there were 12 wounds, including 11 stab wounds to her neck, but the court will hear that there were other injuries which she said may have been defensive. But the whole point she was making there was the cause of death was 11 stab wounds, and that shows intent.
Mm-hmm. And I believe it was also mentioned that there is no prior connection between Miss Murphy and the accused whatsoever.
Yes. So Miss Lawlor was very keen to stress that there was absolutely no connection whatsoever between the accused and Miss Murphy. So in other words, they didn't know each other at all.
Mm-hmm. And then in relation to the accused, I believe there was a bike, is that right, that was recovered next to Miss Murphy's body?
Yes, so it is a green Storm Falcon bike, and the court heard that there is no argument that is Mr. Puska's bike. It was located close to or beside Miss Murphy's body. Her body was found on the Grand Canal way at Cappin Kern in Tullamore on the 12th of January, and the court heard that there is no argument that that is his bike. It heard that his DNA was on it and there was fingerprints on it as well.
Right. And in terms of him then, what did we learn about the accused?
We learned that he was living in Muckla at the time of Miss Murphy's death. We know that he is 33 and a Slovakian national. Now, Miss Lawlor went into some detail about his activities after the death of Miss Murphy. She said that Mr Puska went on the evening of after the evening of Miss Murphy's killing. He went to his parents' house in Crumlin in South Dublin, and he is seen walking into the house that evening wearing a beard and walking in quite calmly. The next time he is seen is at 11:56 the following morning, when she said he is being brought out, she used two words, a gurney and a chair, being brought out from that property in Crumlin, Armagh Road in Crumlin, and he is being brought to St James's Hospital. He told Gardaí that the previous night, the 12th, he had been the victim of a stabbing in Blanchardstown in West Dublin, and he was brought to St James's Hospital in South Central Dublin for treatment.
Okay, and I mean, obviously we're going to hear a lot more detail about this later in the trial, but there was a mention that Gardaí did speak then to Mr Puska while he was in hospital.
Yes, so the court heard that the jury will hear, shall we say, so Miss Lawlor let out her opening gambit, I suppose, that Gardaí from Blanchardstown, there had actually been a stabbing in Blanchardstown on the day that Mr Puska said he was stabbed, and Gardaí from Blanchardstown Garda Station were investigating it, and they were sent to St James's Hospital to interview Mr Puska. Now, Miss Lawlor said the court will hear that the Gardaí who were sent became suspicious about this, and they were aware that there had been a fatal assault in Tullamore, that of Miss Murphy. So they contacted their colleagues in Tullamore, and Gardaí from Tullamore were sent from there, from the investigation headquarters, to St James's Hospital, where Mr Puska was interviewed.
And in that interview, he made what is going to be alleged to be a number of admissions.
Yes, so the evidence will be, the court will hear that at one stage a detective Garda was speaking with Mr Puska, and he was using an interpreter. He had an interpreter on the phone, and it was on the speakerphone so both people could hear it. And the evidence will be that at one stage the interpreter said, Mr Puska has just told me he wants to say something and he wants me to do a word-for-word translation. And
yeah, now I have those quotes in front of me if you want me to read them out.
Yeah, far ahead.
Yeah, so I mean, just from the court report that I see here, the interpreter translated that Mr Puska allegedly said, "I did it, I murdered, I am the murderer." He said, "I didn't do it intentionally, I feel guilty, and I am sorry."
Yes, and I think there are other quotes about how he saw her and there was panic. Do you have those quotes there?
Yes, so there was a further exchange with Detective Garda Fergus Hogan, and the accused apparently told the guard in English that he was sorry, that he'd never seen Ashling Murphy before. He said that he had a knife that he used for the chain of his bike, and he said something to the effect of, "When she pass, I cut her neck. She panic, I panic. Will I go for 10 years?"
And that he didn't, and that it was unintentional. Essentially, that's what the court will also hear that Mr Puska said.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, as I said, I'm sure we'll hear this in its full context, but I understand then there was a follow-up interview with Mr Puska after he was released from hospital, and he was saying something of the opposite in terms of his knowledge of Miss Murphy.
Yes, so he was arrested and brought to Tullamore Garda Station. So on the 18th of January, while under arrest, I think he looked at a photograph of Miss Murphy and said, "No, that's the first time I've ever seen her," basically. So his attitude and demeanour did change.
Yeah, the quote I have here is, "I didn't see her, I don't know her, I never saw her. First, this picture, I have never known her."
Now, just to go back to one thing about when he made these admissions in custody, you'll remember that I said he initially said he had been the victim of a stabbing in Blanchardstown in West Dublin. There will be evidence that while he was making these admissions, he pointed to his abdomen, which is where his injury was, and said, "I do this." He said that in broken English. So in other words, he was saying that he stabbed himself.
Was that it in terms of the overall evidence?
No.
There was.
So the court also heard that Mr. Puska's DNA was found under Miss Murphy's fingernails, and the court heard that there was a 1 in 14,000 chance of that DNA belonging to anybody else. The court also heard that there will be CCTV evidence and witness evidence of the effect that he was in close proximity to 2 other women while he was on his bike in Tullamore earlier in that day. The court heard that one woman, Mr. Puska, was close behind that woman, and she was blissfully unaware that he was behind her, and she walked into a shop. Then the second lady said that she became aware that there was this fella close behind her, and she altered her movements and went into another shop. So there will be plenty of evidence to come, but today really was a roadmap of what the state intends to show in the case.
Yeah, and I mean, there was also evidence briefly about how a witness saw the assailant, and they could see Miss Murphy and her legs kicking.
Yes. So essentially, the court heard that nobody saw what they said was the commencement of the attack, but two people did come across it, and those witnesses will give a description of what they said was the lone assailant. But the court heard that they also described how Miss Murphy's legs were kicking during the assault.
Yeah, so that's kind of the outline of the case. As I say, we'll probably hear all of that detail over the next couple of weeks. We then had a break in the afternoon and came back, and it went into, I suppose, evidence that's kind of difficult, I suppose, to describe in detail. But the jury were shown the maps of all of the areas that are pertinent to this case.
Yes, so Liam Farrell, who is an unsworn member of An Garda Síochána who works with the Garda Mapping Unit, he is responsible for creating maps, and he said he was sent down to Tullamore on the 12th of January. He was originally in Monaghan, but was sent down, and it's his job to create maps. So he did maps of Tullamore out to Muckla. We know that Mr Puska was living in Muckla at the time. So he did various maps there. On one map, he charted various CCTV locations throughout the Tullamore and Muckla Road area. He also did a map of the area where Miss Murphy's body was found, but he also did a floor plan of a property in Crumlin in South Dublin, and we know that Mr Puska's parents live in Crumlin in South Dublin. So it was quite technical in the afternoon. The other witness was Detective Garda Caroline Hughes, who is from the Garda Ballistics section. She's a photographer, and she was talking about photographing various scenes, and she including the place where Miss Murphy's body was found, and she gave evidence of photographing briars and sticks which had bloodstains on them, and she also gave evidence of photographing a pink bobble hat and two separate, although they were a pair, they were some distance, they were a bit away, blue Nike runners. So that was, as I say, that was very technical evidence in the afternoon, but that was us for the day. The final thing was that Mr Justice Tony Hunt said that we'll be returning at 11 o'clock tomorrow, but he did say to the jury, look, you know, I have no problem with you telling people that you're on the jury, but on my direction, you're not to go beyond that. So you can tell people you're on a jury case, but you can't get involved in the nitty-gritty of what is being told. And he was quite strong about that.
Yeah, I just want to briefly return to the allegation of the confession, because just something I wanted to mention in relation to the allegation that he said, I cut her neck. She panic, I panic, and as we mentioned, he then pointed to his own abdomen and said, "I do this." He said that it was not intentional, and it was just pointed out by the prosecution. I just think this is worth noting, that the information as to how Miss Murphy died was not publicly known at this point. So
Yes.
as you mentioned, she had injuries to her neck, and the accused is alleged to have said, "I cut her neck."
Yes, and I think Miss Lawlor even said that the detective Garda who interviewed Mr Puska didn't know how she died, and Miss Lawlor said Mr Puska knew the cause of death when that had not been released into the public domain.
So it's an important piece of evidence, but as I say, all of this we're going to be hearing in much more forensic detail over the coming weeks. So I think we'll leave it there, Mick. That's a great synopsis of today. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. And you're doing this tomorrow, and I'll be asking the questions tomorrow.
I am indeed. Yes, it'll be my first day in the trial tomorrow. And we aim, as we said at the start of this pod, we aim to be there every day and giving you the most up-to-date information. So thanks for listening.
Thanks very much.